Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Communications for American Bird Conservancy and your host today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you afterward. We'll be putting links in the chat, but in case you missed them, please know that we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered, and it'll contain all those links referenced, as well as a link to the recording. Automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the CC icon on your screen. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box so that we can keep track of them. Birds inspire and delight us. They fill us with wonder, and they do so much, from pollination to pest control. But birds are in trouble, and they're disappearing fast. Thanks to generous support from people like you, American Bird Conservancy works with diverse partners throughout the Western Hemisphere to prevent imminent bird extinctions, improve millions of acres of habitat with bird-friendly management practices, and advocate for and create innovative solutions to urgent threats that put birds at risk. And together, we're achieving results. Over the past 30 years, American Bird Conservancy has conserved 3,000 bird species and 10 million acres of habitat for birds across the Americas. And it's been an especially exciting few weeks here at ABC. We've all been anticipating the release of Birds of the Tropical Andes and this webinar. The book's official release date is July 8th, just a few short weeks away, and so many of you here today have already pre-ordered it, and in doing so have supported American Bird Conservancy's mission to conserve wild birds across the Americas. Thank you. I happen to be one of the lucky few to already have a copy of this gorgeous new book, and let me tell you, it is stunning in person. And the screen could never convey just how beautiful it really is. As you can see, I'm trying to show you, it's a large format coffee table style book, perfect for display and to explore solo or with loved ones. The photos are stunning and it's so immersive. As you turn the pages, I'm amazed that somehow each bird feels even more magnificent than the last. These astonishing photos are paired with illuminating essays covering each major ecosystem of the Andes and its bird life, as well as essays by the region's leading bird conservationists, which provide a series of additional viewpoints on the topic, including those of Indigenous leaders. I hope you're inspired today to support bird conservation and have Birds of the Tropical Andes soar into your home. It can be yours for a donation of $50 or more to support American Bird Conservancy's mission today, or a new monthly gift of $10 or more. And for new or returning members, you'll also receive ABC membership benefits, a $75 value, including 3 issues of our member magazine, Bird Conservation, which our summer issue features a beautiful photo of a masked flower piercer from Birds of the Tropical Andes, ABC's annual impact report, and discounts including 30% off the Princeton Nature Catalog. It'll also help us meet our $600,000 goal for Bold for Birds one-to-one match, which could also mean $1.2 million for bird conservation by June 30th. Consider supporting bird conservation and get your copy of Birds of the Tropical Andes by visiting abcbirds.org/new book or by scanning the code you see on your screen with your phone right now. Thank you so much for being here to learn more about Birds of the Andes, and special thanks to all of the ABC members and supporters in the audience today. You are having a powerful impact on bird conservation throughout the Western Hemisphere. But okay, are you ready to take a trip to the Andes? I know I am. I've never been and wish I could go. Our speakers today will give you a firsthand account of what to expect and plan for once you get there. But first, let me be your travel agent for a moment and ensure you're all set with the logistics. For example, you know you want to go birding in the Andes, but where are they exactly? And what do we even mean when we talk about the tropical Andes? So daydream with me for a little bit. Maybe even close your eyes, unless you happen to be tuning into this webinar from, a car and you're driving. Don't do that. But we're going to focus on just imagining the Andes, which is shorthand for the Andes mountain range, which at 5,500 miles is among the world's longest mountain range. These mountains are big. There are 75 peaks with 20,000 feet or more in elevation. To put this in perspective, the Rocky Mountain Range of the US and Canada runs for about 3,000 miles, and its tallest peak is just shy of 14,500 feet. And the Appalachian Mountain Range is just shy of 2,000 miles, and its tallest peak is just over 6,500 feet. The Andes Mountains extend from south to north through 7 South American countries: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela. And its varied terrain encompasses incredible wonders like glaciers and volcanoes, as well as grasslands, deserts, lakes, and forests. Which means it shouldn't be all that surprising that the 2 countries with the most documented bird species in the world are Colombia and Peru. In fact, of the top 7 countries for bird species in the world, 5 of them include at least a portion of the Andes. So what makes the Andes so special for birds, and why do we want to go see birds there? Well, even if I wasn't hosting an American Bird Conservancy webinar right now, I hope you know what answer I'd give. And I've already given you a hint. Any guesses? You got it. It's habitat. In general, the tropics, places that get year-round sunlight, warmth, and moisture, support more species richness and biodiversity globally than anywhere else, animals and plants. And as my fellow gardeners know, lots of plants mean lots of bugs. And with lots of bugs come lots of things that eat bugs, like birds. So other factors contribute to this region's vast biodiversity, including proximity to the Pacific Ocean and subsequent weather patterns. Did you know that the Amazon rainforests get their moisture from the Andes Mountains? It results in a large variety of different habitats across the landscape, which make it an incredible biodiversity possible, including the spectacular bird life that you'll learn about today. This unique and incredible habitat, along with the birds and other wildlife that call it home, face numerous threats, including habitat loss, the #1 threat facing birds today. Luckily, American Bird Conservancy and our partners are working together to do everything possible to ensure the habitat and birds survive and thrive. Thanks in part to the generous support of ABC members like so many of you watching this webinar. Okay, you can open your eyes now because we're here. And we're here in the Andes. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce you to your expert guides on this exploration of birds of the tropical Andes, authors Michael J. Parr and Owen Deutsch. Over a period of 7 years, they traveled to Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, with Owen photographing more than 200 species, which can now be found inside, again, this gorgeous new book. Whether you're planning your trip to the Andes or using this as your virtual passport, they have so many exciting and beautiful things to share with us today. So let me introduce you to them. Owen Deutsch is an acclaimed wildlife photographer and the author of Bringing Back the Birds, Exploring Migration and Preserving Birdscapes Throughout the Americas. Michael J. Parr is president of American Bird Conservancy and the author of several books, including the American Bird Conservancy Guide to Bird Conservation. Again, I'm so excited for you to meet them, and I'd like to welcome them on screen now. Thanks for joining us, Michael and Owen.
Hi, Jordan. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's going to be fun.
Thanks to everyone for joining as well.
We can't wait to hear all of your stories, but we kind of need to set the framework, right? Why did you make this book in the first place? The birds were in it, but Mike, maybe you can tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Well, ABC works with partners throughout the Andes, and we've been working in that part of the world for more than 20 years now. And the reason we work there is because there are so many endangered endemic species throughout the Andes. And also we have migratory birds from North America that spend the northern winter in the Andes. So it's really important for bird conservation. And we've been doing projects in the Andes with a number of partner groups, ECOAN, Pro Aves, Fundación Hocotoco, and Armonía Bolivia in particular, but others, acquiring land for reserves, setting up lodges, protecting habitat for some of the most endangered birds in the Americas. And so over the years, I found myself going down to work with partners from time to time at these areas. And I met Owen. I first met Owen, I saw one of his photographs, and it was, I think, a black and white owl he published somewhere. And it was so good. I'm like, I got to figure out how to take pictures like that. So I called Owen up and I said, like, how did you take this picture? And so he started telling me about it, and we got chatting, and that kind of led to this whole odyssey of our relationship through birds and photography. And I just thought to start with, Owen would like to join me on one of these trips, and we went down and got some great photos. But after I think we did one more trip, and one morning we were in Mindo, Ecuador, and I said to Owen, we got a lot of pics here. We should probably do a book with this. Famous last words. And Owen got enthusiastic because it was, I guess it was early in the morning before we drank our coffee and saw sense. And we said, oh yeah, let's do a book. And anyway, so that's kind of how it got started. Was like over enthusiasm on my part, probably from Owen's great pictures, but we had a lot of great material. It just seemed like it would be a shame not to do something more with it. I mean, Owen has a fantastic website where he puts stuff, but this particular collection of images seemed like it just felt like it should be a book.
That's incredible. And publishing a book, especially with this incredible photography, is something to be so proud of. I mean, what a feat, right? What an accomplishment. Owen, I'd love to know what you're most proud of from this book. What shot did you get that you really enjoyed?
I'm glad you said that because all of them were amazing and were all challenging, but there were these two, the James Flamingo and the sparkling Valetier.
Those colors, beautiful.
Well, glad you said colors because the James Flamingo is gorgeous, but it doesn't have a lot of colors. It doesn't have a lot of background and environment. When the first picture I did was the sparkling Valetier, and it is the epitome of what I would describe as my perfect picture. The composition, the colors, background, the design. In fact, that picture is even wider in the book. I think it's on maybe the third page in the book. I originally wanted that picture to be the cover. It just blew my mind. But it didn't lay out as good as the James Flamingo, because if you look at the cover of the book, there's like text that you have to have some text in there, and it wouldn't have worked in the sparkling Valetier. But that is, as I say, the epitome. Now, the James Flamingo is really, how did I get that? I couldn't have been dreamed of it, but the birds were foraging in the water. I'm holding an 800 millimeter lens because they're 100 yards away, and I'm watching them move. There's a lot of them there. This is 3, but we shot a lot of James Flamingos, but I got my eyes on these 3. They were kind of moving close together, but they kept moving, and I had to keep moving. I don't use a tripod anymore, luckily, because these cameras are the vibration reduction and the amount of resolution is so high that I can get away without doing it. However, a 9.5 pound camera is not easy to hold up too long. So I'm pretty low here. I was kneeling, had the camera in my arm on one knee so I could hold that camera because it is really a problem. Anyway, I'm watching these birds move around and I'm moving with them. And all of a sudden they're getting close, close, close. Bingo, I got this shot. I don't think I'd ever get it again, because try to get 3 flamingos or any 3 birds lined up just the way you want. Anyway, these were the 2 that's the standout pictures. There were a lot of them. There were a lot of other challenges we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
Yeah, we will for sure. We want to hear all your stories. But Mike, do you have any great highlights from the book, whether they're actual stories or just birds that you would like to share?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot. It's actually hard to pick, but I think, as I was saying earlier, we got a great collection of cloud forest images, and that was the main body of work that started the book. But we did realize, to reflect really the avifauna of the Andes, we needed to think about the whole transect of the Andean chain from the Pacific slope over to the highest part of the Andes, and then down into the sort of foothills in Amazonia, and even the sort of dry southeast part of Bolivia, which is still of the Andes, a very different characteristic from the cloud forest further north. So we actually planned out a couple of trips, actually with one of our friends and guide, Nathan Goldberg, in particular, did a lot of work to help us with that, as did Juan Carlos Crespo, who was working for us and with us on the ground. And we needed to kind of complete the collection, if you like, and add to the cloud forest images with those other ones. So we kind of did some kind of rapid fire expeditions to complete the book and also do some more of the research and writing. So I was really proud of the last sort of really kind of concentrated image acquisition plan that we had to get the high altitude flamingos, which you've seen here, and then some of the macaws, which are just absolutely amazing. I'm sure we'll take a look at some of those. But firstly, these red-fronted macaws in the southeastern foothills, which I think Owen should tell the story of that. And then the Amazonian macaws, which we'll look at next. And then the flamingos from the very high altiplano in Bolivia. Those sort of three anchor shoots were really, really important. We got a lot of images from all of those, including the cover picture. So, yeah, I mean, Owen, I don't know whether you'd like to add to that, but I mean, you were taking these pictures and you did a fantastic job with it, I thought.
Well, it was the red-fronted Macaw Reserve was really a highlight of the trip because, first of all, when we got there, I think it was at the first day, Mike, we got there and we were running a little late. They were the people at the reserve were expecting us a little earlier. We got there a little later, and we couldn't. There was a river that surrounded it, and we didn't know how to get in. We were, I don't know, words panic. Our plan was, okay, we'll sleep in the cars. There were 2 carloads of people, and we will sleep in the cars, and then we'll get there in the morning. But we were lucky. We'd rather be lucky than smart. They showed up, and they showed us the way to drive across the river, and we got across the river, and we got some sleep. I must have had a good 5 hours sleep that night because the next morning we had to be in place before sunrise on the ground, laying in the bird poop because it was crazy. We were warned very heavily, don't move a muscle because if you do, they'll be gone. Anyway, they all started coming in one at a time and then in swarms. And I'm there laying low, shooting my way all over. And then they started landing in the trees like this one shot here. And it was wild. Now, you know what's so great, Mike, I'm sure you can talk more about it, but the reason they built the red-fronted macaw and why ABC supported it is because the farmers were killing these macaws because they were eating their crops. So when when we got there, they at the reserve, they spread, barrels of peanuts out. And then the birds came in and they started to take. And there's some other pictures here. I don't know, gorgeous pictures of these birds flying around. And this is what it's all about, saving these precious birds. I don't know if you have some pictures of several of them together, but you fall in love with them. Part of the problem is, there we go, those 2 lovely hugging each other, kissing each other, the red-fronted macaws. I knew years ago when I didn't know what a bird, everything was a sparrow. Years ago, we had friends who had macaws and they kept them and it was wonderful. But the world, the people, the public has got to know that because there's also the problem with the captive bird trade is one of the biggest problems. Mike, you can talk more about it than I can, but I know everybody wants a macaw, but I think the word is getting out to the public that these birds got to live in the wild or they're not going to be anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this picture of the red-fronted macaws that you've taken, I mean, I've seen a lot of photographs like that of captive birds, but this is a photograph of wild birds, and it's amazing because they are a little shy, and you did a great job of kind of staying quiet and staying hidden. But red-fronted macaw is one of the world's rarest macaws, and it's confined to Bolivia. It's not the only macaw confined to Bolivia. There's also blue-throated macaw. But yeah, they had a sort of double problem. One was they were, eating some of the crops and also poaching. They nest on cliffs, and people were taking the chicks from the cliffs, and the birds were suffering from the farmers either trying to scare them away or even shoot them because they were taken from the crops. So ABC's partner, Omonia, set up a reserve with the indigenous community. There's a lodge owned and run by the indigenous community, and they are now protecting the macaws from poaching. And at the same time, like Owen said, the supplemental feeding keeps the macaws away from the crops. And it's sort of a win-win now because the local community is benefiting from some revenue from tourists like us And I guess one theme I'd like to kind of reiterate about this whole book and this whole webinar is you can go. It's not that difficult. And, it's a long way to go, but it's on a paved road and you can get there. You can stay there. It's a beautiful little lodge and you can see red-fronted macaws. There's a blind there. You can get photographs. These are some of the best photographs of this species I've seen, but I think there'll be more good ones coming out now because there's a blind there. If you're willing to get up in the morning before light and go and hide in the blind, you will see these beautiful macaws. And when you see a picture of them normally, they sort of look green. They look a little like a military macaw or something like that. But honestly, as you can see the underwing there, they are incredibly colorful macaws and they are surviving thanks to mostly Armonia's work, conserving them with the indigenous community. And we are just the ambassadors to tell you about it and to try and raise some money to help continue this project and keep these macaws safe. And we hope by showing you them and showing all these birds in the book, it'll encourage you to think about, either I can help or I can go down and help because it is so much fun.
You guys shared so many things that our awesome audience has questions about. So I'm going to kind of follow up about a few different topics here. So let's go back, Mike. You were saying about Armonia and our partner. You were saying about the lodge, but what else should we pack? I'm sure, especially if you're trying to get these incredible photography shots and you're birding, that's a lot of gear. Oh, and you mentioned 2 cars. Was that for people or all of your gear? So,
No,
Mike, but Mike, I'd love for you to start with, again, what did you take for birding and photography? And then let's get Owen to share too.
Yeah, so for the southeast Bolivia, I mean, it's dry and it's fairly warm, so you need some sunscreen. It's not all that buggy. So, a good hat. I mean, I'd take some bug spray, but you're not really going to encounter too many bugs. Um, and really just, binoculars and a camera. And it depends on we'll get into what types of cameras we use in a little bit, but it's not all that complicated. And you can fly into, say, Cochabamba and get a ride down there. And, Armonia or ABC could help advise on how you might do a tour to the Macor area. If you're traveling in the Andes in general, there are other challenges in different areas. There's altitude, which is nothing to be scared about, but you have to be aware of, and you can acclimatize very easily. So, starting lower and then going higher is always better. The Andes can be variable and it can be wet. So you do need to take layers. You do need to take rain gear, and you might get wet underfoot. I usually buy rubber boots in country and then leave them at the lodge because somebody always needs them. So I don't have to carry them with me, and it's usually easy to find them. But you do encounter a lot of different conditions because you're going from low to high, hot to cold, wet to dry. So you do have to pack some clothes. Be prepared.
Mike, I would like to point out that my first trip to high altitude was Cusco years ago. I didn't know anything about acclimating to height. I got off a plane from Lima, landed in Cusco. Within 15 minutes, my head was coming off. You've got to acclimate. And I also took altitude pills. One of our, by the way, it has nothing to do with age. And I said, oh, I don't believe that. But the youngest person on our trip did have some serious trouble with the altitude. And we did acclimate. I think maybe we took 3 days from going low to going high, and that was really important. It's worth it.
And you need to acclimate at any time of the year that you visit. But what time were you both traveling for the book?
We did a variety of times. I mean, you can actually go pretty much any time of the year. They say don't go in the wet season, but the wet season is actually really good for birding. And I've been to Ecuador in January, which is, supposed to be the wet season, had great trips. It doesn't rain all day, typically usually in the afternoon. This particular trip that we're looking at the picture now, this was the Cactus Canastero site. This is Lomas de Asia on the Peruvian coast south of Lima. Cactus Canastero is tricky. This particular place, we got there in the middle of the day, and it was about a 3-kilometer hike up this mountain. And yeah, we needed a bit more water on that one, but we got through it. But yeah, it's, it's a variety of things. And I think in terms of acclimatization, you plan your trip. And you can use some of the tour companies from the US or around the world that go and they'll plan that out. Or if you're going to go on your own, just start lower and work up higher. That's basically how I always do it, and never had any problems. Just be aware of the altitude effects. And if you're feeling ill, then you take it easy.
Mike,
Get down, get
I've got to
downhill.
say one thing. When we did the book, planning the book, we were supposed to have not as much text as it ended up, but I've recently been spending a lot of time, you're laughing, a lot of time reading the book, and there are a lot, you got to read the book. I mean, everybody just likes to look at the pretty pictures, but the book has a lot of wonderful hints about what roads, how to get in and get out of different places, and a lot of this information. It's really worthwhile reading what Mike said, because he does a wonderful job. He knows the tropical Andes inside and out, and I know him pretty well, but I never remember what I see or whatever. So that's where I have guides and people like Mike to help me.
Yeah, that's kind of you, Owen. And yeah, I mean, I have been to the Andes. I think I've done 30 trips to the tropical Andes. So if you're thinking about going, this is not a field guide, so you'll need field guides. And most of the Andean field guides are apps now. You can download them anyway onto your phone. Um, but if you're thinking about going for the first time, I can save you a lot of time in planning because I've gone to a lot of the places. I've checked out what's good, what's not so good, which are the best birding sites, even like what times to go of the day, how to get in, where the best places to look for things, and some of the key species you might look for. So it's helpful from that point of view. And one of the main reasons we did this is to encourage people to go birding in the tropical Andes, because if you go and stay at some of the reserves that ABC's helped to set up with partners, you're actually helping bird conservation, because just by staying there and paying to stay, you're going to contribute to guarding, looking after the lodge, those types of things, paying for staff. That helps to conserve the site. So just being a bird tourist at these sites helps conserve birds beyond anything else. And I just want to be really encouraging that it is so fun to go. It's easy to travel there. The stories that you've heard probably from the past about, there's difficulties and things like that. Like most other places, it's very localized or non-existent now. It's very peaceful and people are very welcoming, and it's highly recommended for birding.
It's this lesser, yeah. I was just gonna say this lesseria this is one of the last birds we shot on the trip, and it was another nemesis bird. They're hard to find. We're driving along the flats, the salt flats, and all of a sudden the driver's yelling, "There's the lesseria!" And he was pretty close, but it was really hot out there. I had my 800 millimeter lens, and he was right. The driver was between me and the bird, and he's flying back in his seat. And I know a couple of people got upset because I was a little hard on him. I said, "Get back, get back." Anyway, this was the first frame that I shot because he kept running, and they run pretty fast. He kept running and I kept shooting, but there was a lot of heat coming off of the salt flats, and the heat from the salt flats is ripples in the environment, and the pictures were more blurred. This is the only really sharp picture I got, but it was very exciting. Everybody was a couple were upset with me for being so loud, but I said, "Hey, we need this lesseria." Anyway, it was another challenging and fun time for this trip.
Oh,
Yeah, it was interesting. And this is another tip for birders. The lesser rheas, when I first went up there, I thought we would be looking really in the Altiplano in the wilderness. But believe it or not, that is actually a semi-cultivated pasture. Well, it's not a pasture, sorry, it's a semi-cultivated field. And the lesser rheas, all of the lesser rheas we saw were in either semi-cultivated or plowed areas, and none of them were in the out in the wild altiplano. So if you're going to be looking for lesser rheas, be looking for places that have got slight cultivation. That's like the book's full of little tips like that, of little tricks and tips to find tricky birds.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of these shots, this is not an endorsement at all. No paid advertising here. but I do want to make sure that Owen, you especially share what photography equipment you use to get these incredible shots that have been showing on the screen. So, and then Mike, I'd love for you to share, because I know you take photos too. So what photography equipment and binoculars are you using? But Owen, you go first.
Okay, well, I don't use binoculars because it's something extra to carry around my neck, and I'm not a birder. There's a big difference between a birder and a bird photographer. Birders want to see the birds, get all the identification. They can look through their scopes. The bird's 300 yards away. They saw the bird. Okay, I got that one. Let's move next. That's what I experience when I go out birding with birders. Bird photographers are nothing like that. I think they're more passionate about the birds because they want to get the beautiful pictures. Now, this is a good shot. This shot was done. I use Nikon, the Z cameras, the Nikon Z9. And this shot looks like, hey, you could get it, but the Nikon has a new software where they call it pre-release. I saw this bird sitting on a wire, and I said, I quickly, now that's something else I'm going to tell you about being a photographer, is you need to know your equipment forwards and backs and be able to move quickly, almost without rote muscle memory. Anyway, he's on that wire, and he wasn't going to sit there for long. I set my camera for pre-release. He jumped, and normally I would have missed the shot. But what pre-release is, this is maybe a hard concept for people to understand. I couldn't understand it at all. I think I can explain it better than I ever heard before. Cameras, digital cameras or mirrorless cameras have a buffer. And the buffer originally meant to use, so when you're shooting rapid, fast shutters, many frames a second, 20, 30 frames a second, the buffer is where the pictures get stored, because normally you can't shoot that fast. The card will fill up. Anyway, they have a buffer. The pre-release is like magic. You won't believe it, but it's running all the time in the camera. So when you push the button, my camera is set for a half a second. So when I push the button, a half a second before I push the button, it will show me the pictures that the camera recorded. So when you're looking at this Gira cuckoo sitting on a wire and he jumps, you've missed him. But if I don't forget to push the button anyway, it goes back a half a second, and the half a second is, you got it. So it's really a miracle. Now, as far as my camera equipment you asked, now with these improved cameras and equipment, you don't need tripods unless you want to have a tripod, because they're so fast. What else on they have eye tracking for exposure, where you wonder, look at that eye on that bird. The camera, you can see it, it's like a rocket ship. It just zooms in on it and locks on. It's locked on and you got the picture. So I'm not quite as good a photographer, but I learned how to use my equipment, and it takes a lot of practice. I can't say that enough to all you aspiring bird photographers. Practice, 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 because you've got to know your equipment. If the bird switches and I have to switch something without looking, I flipped my dial on it and I got it zeroed in. It doesn't come easily, and I'm still learning. Anyway, I think I've given you a pretty good idea of what the equipment I use. Did I say I don't carry binoculars? How can I carry binoculars when I've got all this other equipment? And I don't need to. I've got lenses that are telephoto. So that gives you an idea of what it's like to learn to do photography.
That was wonderful, Owen. Yeah, and don't sell yourself short. These photos are incredible. But I also know that you have taken thousands of photos in an hour just to get the perfect shot. So, I appreciate that you're saying that you're still practicing too. But Mike, Owen mentioned about having passion for birds, right? And the difference between birding and photography. Do you want to speak a little bit about that passion for birding, and then why we're doing all of these conservation efforts? Why is ABC
Yeah.
doing so much in the region?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think birders are also passionate about birds. Our passion might be expressed slightly differently. So Owen and I can duke that one out later. But no, I mean, we're working in the region, as I said, because it's so important for bird conservation. And the things you said about the Andes, why there's so many birds there, um, that also goes a step further in that you have many different valleys and mountaintops where species become isolated over time, and then slowly but surely they adapt and become individual, unique forms. And the Andes is the place, probably the place on the planet that's got the most versions of these. And bear in mind that the Andes has been settled for a very long time. It's not really a wilderness. There are wilderness areas, but a large part of the high Andes has been settled and there are a lot of people living there. So when you have very high diversity, as in the tropics, then you have high endemism, as in these very kind of interesting topographies where you get all these valleys and mountaintops, and you add in the threats of habitat loss because of the pastures and human development. That's sort of the perfect storm of threats and diversity, which means that the Andes are probably one of the places on the planet with the most isolated endangered species. The good news for us with that is, you know, it's good and bad. It's two sides of the same coin. One is they have very small ranges, and they're very threatened sometimes. But because they got a very small range, a smallish reserve can be enough to prevent them from becoming extinct. Unlike some of the birds that range across huge areas and their declines are difficult to slow, if you can conserve that one place, you can prevent that species from becoming extinct. So that's one of the reasons that it's super important for us to work there. And those are some of the challenges and opportunities. You're showing us a giant ant pitter right now, which I got a couple of cool stories about this, but I think a lot of people I've seen some people saying they've been to Ecuador. People may have seen this bird. It's in a little reserve called Paz de las Aves run by Angel Paz. And he discovered that giant ant pitters were a bird sought after by birders, and he learned to attract them by calling. He had the first one, Maria. He would call Maria and then give some mealworms. These are earthworms, but slowly but surely he would encourage Maria to come, and then he took this and applied it to other ant pitters and other birds there. And so he was able to show people these birds, which before were almost mythical. I mean, hardly any birders saw giant ant pitters. It was basically only researchers who were there for months. There's a story about two groups birding near Mindo, and somebody was hearing the giant ant pitter calling, and they're like, "Oh, it's just around that corner, just around that corner." And they get around the corner, and there's another group using the playback, the giant ant pitter, and that's what it was. So very, very difficult bird to find. But then Angel Paz was able to develop this feeding technique, and now you can get these amazing photographs of not just this ant pitter, but ant pitters are particularly tricky. And he's got chestnut crowned, mustached, ochre bellied ant pitter, yellow breasted ant pitter, all coming to worms, and they're fabulous birds. And they're like, as you can see, they've got very little in the way of a tail, and they bounce around. They're just like comical little characters. I managed to get stung by hornets when I was seeing it. There was a bit of a battle, but I survived it. Not too bad. And but most of the time, you don't have to go into the forest like I did, because I think these ones were actually on the road. And if I remember rightly, there were about 25 people watching these giant ant pitters. And so it's a bird that went from mythical status to, you can kind of anticipate seeing it now if you go down to Ecuador, to the Mindo area, which I'd like to talk about some more as we go through this. But it is some of the most fabulous birding on planet Earth. It really is.
That's amazing. Well, just before we switch topics, Mike, I'd love for you to share if there are any exciting projects at ABC right now that you're, really tracking, whether it's through the rest of the year or coming up. We're always doing such innovative work to get those results for birds. And you mentioned the endemics, but the Andes also host a lot of migratory birds, so that overlap is huge. So I just wanted to give you one more opportunity to share anything about ABC work right now specifically.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've been working on closing the gaps of protected area coverage for the most endangered birds in the Americas now for some time. And we've completed a gap analysis to just see like how much work is left to make sure that every endangered bird has at least one protected area. We're going to be rolling that out later in the year. And that'll be kind of the North Star for where we need to create reserves next. And it's good news for the most part. There are actually relatively few endangered birds now in the Americas that don't have at least a protected area. But we're going to try and complete the network of protected areas, so all endangered birds in the Americas. That's one of our top priorities related to the work in the Andes. And the other one, as you mentioned, is migratory birds. And I mentioned earlier that they fan out over much larger areas. So we're really focused on making production systems more effective for bird conservation, because if you've been to the neotropics, you'll see that a lot of the warblers that are common here are actually in coffee plantations, cacao plantations, little bits of forest around the edge of pastures. They're not just in protected areas, and they fan out over multiple countries. So we can't really protect neotropical migratory bird habitat just by protected areas. It's important, but it's not enough on its own. We have to work with production systems. So a big part of our work is figuring out how we can work with landowners to improve the management of production systems like coffee, cacao, even cardamom, even actually ranching in grasslands for birds like the bobolink and other grassland birds that winter in the south. So that's another big part of our work, and we'll be rolling more information on that. If you check the latest magazine, I think you'll see information on our Birds Plus program, which is developing conservation practices and working out ways that we can actually invest in projects with landowners to help them create better habitat for neotropical migrants. So those are our two big kind of approaches in Latin America with partners, always with partners, is to figure out how we can better work in production systems and generally increase biomass, not always, but largely speaking, often woody biomass by creating canopy or shade in crops, and then also completing the protected area network. We're well along with that. Migratory bird work, I think we're more at the start of the journey than the end of the journey, but there's some exciting stuff going on. So those two big areas for work in the Andes for ABC would be the main things I would like to mention.
No,
And
those
we need support, and we appreciate all the support we get for sure,
I
but
do.
it's a big job.
Oh, and
I'd like to comment about this grid. This grid was near and dear to my heart with the idea, the concept. This grid has about 50 pictures in it in the back of the book, and there are more than that many books. These birds were all shot in North America, the United States, a lot of them in Chicago, all by me. And they're gorgeous birds. I saw them all in the tropical Andes because they migrate to and from the tropical Andes. And that's the idea I wanted to project was, hey, now everybody can relate to these birds. You know, a number of these are in my previous book because they weren't all in this book. But these birds, a shot in Chicago of all you people who live in the States will recognize these birds. They're all migrating to and from the tropical Andes. And everybody can relate to it and now feel at home. Like you said, who's going to be able to get there? These were all, I think, mostly shot in the spring, but it was a lot of fun. And there's a QR code in the book, so you can actually hear all these birds, their sounds. It was a lot of fun doing it.
That's amazing. Well, speaking of having fun while getting these shots and everything, I know there's a really specific story that you both have talked about as well involving sheets. Do you want to talk about more about that experience right now? So
Sure, yeah.
So for the audience, so Mike and Owen and various other people, it's a common practice, will put up these white sheets. But Mike, do you want to explain why?
Yeah, just quickly. It's like I call it the artificial ant swarm because a lot of forest birds follow ant swarms, not because they feed on ants, but because the ants, the army ants, disturb or injure other insects as they go through the forest. And so birds follow them in order to pick off the other insects. But ant swarms are hard to find and they're unpredictable. And there are a few lodges who came up with this idea of putting up a sheet and putting on an ultraviolet light and attracting moths and other insects for birds that would typically follow ant swarms. And so this one is near Mindo. It's my friend Vinicio Perez who runs it. And he basically puts the light on at night. And in the morning, you have to be there while it's still dark. And some of the forest birds, like the Swainson's thrush, which actually winters there, or this Rufous motmot, will come down to capture some of the insects in the morning. And these are birds that would be very difficult to see very often or photograph in the forest, but they can come quite close while they're feeding at these sheep feeders. So this whole practice of feeding birds is becoming very big in Latin America in general, but particularly in the Mindo area of Ecuador, where these pictures were taken. It's interesting that it's not only the one place, several places are running them now, and it's quite spectacular. If you get there and sit quietly, and as you can see, they've got these mossy logs. Owen taught me about mossy logs. Mossy logs are the best backgrounds for images, and you get these wood creepers. People who've seen wood creepers, they're often like hopping around the back of the tree, and you're like, was that a montine, or was that a tyrannine, or was it something else? Was it a wedge build? But very often at the sheep feeders, they'll actually come out so you can photograph them, which normally is tough. And even like the striped tree hunter, another bird, they kind of forage on bromeliads, often sort of on limbs, and they're hidden. But they will come out and you can get pictures of them and see them really nicely, where often you're in a cloud forest with the fog and you've got a mixed feeding flock, and you'll see a glimpse of a tree hunter and you're like, oh, was that, a foliage gleaner? Was it a tree hunter? It just disappeared. But at these, they'll come out and you can see them really nicely. But I think Owen would also kind of give some comments on that from a photography point of view too.
Mike, you did raise your hand there. You raised your hand at the end because it was like, oh, you weren't very descriptive of what it was like to shoot those birds, the ones on, if you put the picture up of those 3 birds with the moths in their mouth. The birds love moths, and that. Look at the light behind there. This particular picture I remember well because the light, it was still before sunrise, but the light from the sheets are, they're bright, very bright lights on those sheets that attract the moths like crazy. It was pandemonium. And look at that beautiful, it was just too much fun. And it was crazy. My heart wouldn't stop beating as I was shooting these exciting photographs of these birds. I shot some without the moths in their mouth, but look at the moths on there that Mike's talking about. They're just beautiful. And it was exciting. I can't tell you, but it was not only exciting, it was challenging to get these pictures, to get enough light and to shoot. Like I had the guides hold flashlights off to the side. You can't even see it, but I wouldn't have shot this with flash, and I didn't. But the moths were great, and it was a really exciting. There were other exciting times on this trip when we were doing the macaws on the Lex. I'm sure we'll probably talk about that soon. But these were very exciting and a lot of fun.
That's incredible, Owen, and they're gorgeous photos. Mike, I do want to ask you, though, about the impacts of all of this. Is there anything that folks should be concerned about just in terms of ethical birding and, having birds that close or using flashlights? Is there anything else that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, well, birds' eyes are similar to humans, so you don't want to be exposing birds to a lot of light. But they choose to go near to the feeder themselves. Flash, we don't really use flash, but a bird will recover from flash just like a human will. But you wouldn't want to use flash close to birds too much. So we haven't been using flash like in-camera flash. But yeah, I think the thing is, yes, there are some impacts probably from feeders. There are probably some impacts from some of these things. The biggest problem by far for conservation in the Andes, like almost everywhere else, is habitat loss. And I think we should be careful not to get sidetracked by some very minimal impacts when millions of acres could be just disappearing before our eyes. That's probably where we need to focus. But I think it's quite important also just to make sure that we're also doing the right thing. So the Birders Code of Conduct is the place to go for that, and think about your impact on the birds. Don't approach birds. It's not a very good way to get photographs anyway, because you just flush birds off and they don't, they're not going to stick around. The best way to get pictures is to wait for the birds to come to you. And so I think there's some common sense things, but also looking at the Birders Code of Ethics, but also just making sure that we as a community focus on the fact that habitat loss is what we really need to make sure doesn't continue, because you're going to lose entire species that way. while still maintaining best practices for and showing leadership on these things and setting an example. But I would follow the Birders Code of Ethics on that front every time. And just, I mean, I think using flash, I don't think the Birders Code of Ethics says don't use flash, but we don't. Just be very, very sparing with things like playback or flash. Don't use it on endangered species, close to the nest, those types of things. Very important to follow those kind of guidelines.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
400 millimeter, I use a 400, the smallest, shortest lens I use is a 400 millimeter, and the longest I use is an 800 millimeter lens with a great resolution. And so that's probably the best way to see more birds, because if you get too close, they won't come to you. And so the longer the lens you can use, the better. These were all shot with long lenses, 800 millimeter lenses.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
another thing, Jordan, on that topic is, people might be concerned about travel and flying and carbon footprint. And, you know, what ABC does is we calculate and offset our entire carbon footprint as an organization, including all our travel through planting trees. And I think, if we stay home, if everybody were to stay home and not go to some of these lodges, the ability to sustain these reserves would evaporate and they will eventually turn into pastures. And so we need to make sure that they are sustained as protected areas. And one way to do that is to give them a sustainable source of income through bird tourism. So I think if people are concerned about carbon, our recommendation is calculate and offset your carbon. That's what ABC does. But if we stop bird tourism and stop traveling to these places, it's going to put them in jeopardy.
It's all about context, right? So going back to Mike, you mentioned the Code of Ethics by American Birding Association, right? Like
Yep.
having that feeding, having, close baiting, having playback, it's really important to always put the bird first, right? And so in the States, there are places where you have these really sensitive species that you don't want to draw attention to or stress them out, right? So we have to make sure that if we're Americans, in Chicago with Owen, we want to make sure if there's an owl, we don't use playback necessarily. We don't put bait there because of the other people and the city that we're in, right? It's very different in the Andes where you both were where you were photographing these things. And we want to, again, put that habitat loss front of mind. How can we, prevent that? How can we conserve these areas and then work with partners to move forward? So I just want to, again, address our audience concerns and really appreciate how concerned they are about putting those birds first. But we definitely have more information that we can follow up and share with just if people have any remaining concerns. And the only other reason why I'm slightly rushing right now is because time is quickly running out, and I definitely want to make sure that, Owen, you share about these playlacks quick before we don't have any more time. So tell me about these macaws, because they are so colorful and so vibrant. It must have been something to see them.
It was to die for. I didn't know what to expect. In fact, before I got there, I never had been on a clay lick before. And Mike can explain better than I can about why they eat that clay lick. It's something for their intestines but they're crazy. Like the picture on the left, it has them flying towards me. And the one on the right, they're flying off to the side. They're flying like mad. And we're on a hill over the birds, probably, I don't know, 40, 50 feet away. And they're coming in, and sometimes they would move hectically. It was just an exciting experience. I know I shot well over 1,500 pictures in a short period of time. I think Mike was shooting faster than me. And I wasn't sure I had any that were slightly sharp or the composition was good. It happened so fast, I didn't know, but I was very happy with the results.
It's incredible. It looks like a living rainbow almost. I can't imagine actually experiencing it in person.
Yeah, so Owen mentioned the reason the parrots come down. There's sort of two reasons. One is parrots eat vegetation, seeds, seed pods, things like that, which have some toxins which they can counteract with elements from the clay. And there's also minerals they get from the clay as well, which contribute to their diet. So it's a sort of two-pronged reason. this is a nice group. There's mealy parrots there, but there's also the orange-cheeked parrots, a couple of blue-headed parrots, and then dusky-headed parakeets at the front right there. So it's a nice little mixed group of parrots along with the macaws. We waited for hours and hours for the macaws to come down. They were very nervous to start with and waited for the smaller parrots to come down first before they would come down, because there are predators like ocelots there that they are trying to avoid. And so they waited for the smaller parrotlets to, make sure that there weren't any predators there before they were willing to come down. It was quite a wait, and quite interesting to watch their behavior and how nervous they were. But once they came down and the first one decided to do it, then the next 20 came, and there were a lot more macaws there actually than the ones you saw in the picture. There's like the red and greens there, the scarlets, and the red and green on the left with the green in the wing replaced by yellow in the scarlets in the center of the picture. And then your blue and yellows over on the right, all three species. And this is in the Tambapada area of the Peruvian Amazon.
That's amazing. I'm sure you both could keep talking for hours with all the stories and content in this book, but I unfortunately have to wrap up. And so I want to ask Owen, what is one thing that you hope that everyone takes away from this webinar and tells a friend, other than buying the book?
Is support. These birds are worth fighting for, because they're going to be gone. They're going to be gone. My grandson will never see them except in the book. In fact, I just gave him the book the other day, and he was like amazed and loved. Oh, look at the colors! It was a fun. It's really, they're worth saving. If you can't get there in person, get the book. It's exciting, and they're worth fighting for.
Absolutely. And Mike?
I would echo that. I mean, ABC is helped with partners. It's conserved more than 1 million acres of habitat in the Andes. We can only do that because of people supporting our work. And the book is a something we can give back to our supporters. But then also, please think about visiting the tropical Andes. And if you've got any particular questions, I'd love to hear from you as to places you might want to go. But if you can go down and encourage conservation there just by visiting, particularly in Ecuador, this whole ecotourism around birds is really conserving huge amounts of habitat. Even small communities and families are putting up some hummingbird feeders, and they're conserving habitat that otherwise would probably be turning into pastures. It's hugely important. And yeah, I hope you'll enjoy the book. It was a lot of fun working on it, and we put our passion into it, and hopefully it'll be a way for you to find out more about birds of the Andes and help protect them. And
Well,
thanks for all your support.
Thank you, Mike and Owen, and congratulations. Again, this book is incredible. I hope all of our registrants today enjoy hearing some behind the scenes exclusive content that you're only going to get from Mike and Owen here at ABC. And the conservation efforts that you've learned about are also only possible thanks to members and supporters like you who care about birds and believe in ABC's mission to conserve them. I hope you've been inspired today to support bird conservation and to get, again, your very own copy of Birds of the Tropical Andes. Please visit abcbirds.org/new book to support ABC's bird conservation mission with just a gift of $50 or more and a monthly gift of $10 or more if you decide that route. We'll be delighted to send you a copy of this lovely book as soon as it hits shelves on July 8th. So remember, new or returning members will also receive full ABC membership benefits, including our recently redesigned magazine and exciting discounts, all a $75 value, and help us meet our $600,000 Gold for Birds one-to-one match, which could mean $1.2 million for bird conservation by June 30th. So again, visit abcbirds.org/new book or scan the code you see on your screen with your phone now. Thank you so much for caring about birds and sharing American Bird Conservancy's mission to conserve them. And as always, good birding.
Thanks.
Thank you. Glad to be here.